Welcome back, economic warriors, to Boss Economics World. Your one-stop shop for exposing the chaos of global markets, the blunders of policymakers, and the absolute train wreck that is modern economic governance. I'm your host, the guy who screams supply and demand in his sleep, here to break down the latest economic dumpster fire, this time, straight out of Hungary. Buckle up, because we're diving deep into the land of goulash, geopolitics, and government goofs. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, today we've got a real spicy one for you. Hungary's central bank is clutching its 6.5% interest rate like a life raft in a storm, refusing to budge for the 7th month in a row. And why? Because, apparently, the world is on fire, and Hungary's economic wizards think the best way to fight the flames is to sit on their hands and pray for rain. But don't take my word for it, let's tear this apart, layer by layer, from the surface clownery to the deep, systemic rot. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll be as furious as I am about how governments and central banks are driving us all straight into the economic abyss. First, let's start with the headline act. Hungary's central bank, the National Bank of Hungary, NBH, is keeping its benchmark interest rate at 6.5%. Now, for those of you keeping score at home, that's tied with Romania for the highest rate in the entire European Union. Yep, while the rest of Europe is slashing rates faster than a Black Friday sale, Hungary's sitting there, arms crossed, saying, nah, we're good. And why, you ask? Well, according to the NBH's new governor, Mihai Varga, it's all about being disciplined and patient. Oh, bless their hearts. Disciplined and patient, like a sloth on a coffee break while the economy burns. But wait, there's more. Governor Varga, who just waltzed into his role in March 2025, dropped this gem at the IMF spring meeting in Washington. Geopolitical tensions are intensifying, risks are rising, and Hungary needs to stay the course. Translation: we're terrified of doing anything because the world is a mess, and we'd rather just hide under our desks. And to top it off, Vice Governor Zoltán Korály, who's apparently still finding his footing at his first monetary council meeting, is parroting the same line: orthodox policy is the way to go, prioritizing price and financial market stability. Oh, how noble. Meanwhile, inflation is still raging at 4.7%, nowhere near their 3% target, and the forint is bouncing around like a yo-yo on a roller coaster. So, what's the takeaway here, folks? On the surface, we've got a central bank that's frozen in fear, clinging to high interest rates while the economy chokes, all under the guise of discipline. But oh, dear viewer, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Let's dig deeper into the real economic issues, and the government's role in this mess, because trust me, it gets so much worse. Now, let's zoom out a bit and talk about why Hungary is in such a precarious position to begin with. Hungary prides itself on being one of the most open economies in Europe, which sounds great on paper, until you realize that open is just a fancy way of saying vulnerable to every global economic sneeze. And boy, is the world sneezing right now. With global trade tensions escalating, thanks, in no small part, to US President Donald Trump's tariff war, Hungary is caught in the crossfire. And who's getting burned? You guessed it, the Hungarian people, who are watching their economy get pummeled while their central bank twiddles its thumbs. Here's the deal: Hungary's economy is heavily reliant on exports, with over 80% of its GDP tied to international trade, according to World Bank data from 2024. And guess who its biggest trading partners are? The European Union, of course, but also, drumroll, please, China. That's right, Hungary has been cozying up to Chinese investments faster than you can say, Belt and Road Initiative. In fact, Chinese foreign direct investment in Hungary jumped by 25% in 2023 alone, making it one of the top recipients of Chinese capital in Europe, per the Mercator Institute for China Studies. Sounds like a sweet deal, right? Wrong. Because when Trump slaps tariffs on Chinese goods, and China retaliates, Hungary gets caught in the crosshairs, with its export-driven economy taking a direct hit. And let's not forget the forint, Hungary's currency, which has been swinging wildly like a piñata at a kid's birthday party. Just last month, in mid-April 2025, the forint hit a 3-month low against the euro, all because of tariff policy concerns. Sure, it's rebounded a bit since then, but don't be fooled, this is a currency on life support, and the central bank's refusal to cut rates isn't helping. In fact, money market traders are already pricing in nearly 90 basis points of rate cuts by early 2026, according to forward rate agreements. Translation: even the markets know this disciplined and patient nonsense is unsustainable. But hey, why act now when you can just kick the can down the road, right, NBH? Now, let's talk about the real elephant in the room: inflation. Hungary's annual price growth slowed for the first time in 6 months in March 2025, but at 4.7%, it's still light years away from the central bank's 3% target. And here's the kicker: the NBH says it won't even think about cutting rates until inflation is, sustainably, on a downward path. Sustainably? Folks, at this rate, we'll be waiting until 2030. Meanwhile, Hungarian families are getting crushed under the weight of rising prices, and businesses are struggling to borrow at these sky-high interest rates. But here's where it gets really juicy. Why is inflation so stubborn in Hungary? Well, part of it is global, supply chain disruptions, energy price shocks, you name it. But a huge chunk of it is homegrown, courtesy of, you guessed it, the Hungarian government. For years, the government has been pumping money into the economy through populist spending programs, trying to buy votes with handouts and subsidies. Just look at the numbers. Hungary's fiscal deficit ballooned to 6.7% of GDP in 2024, one of the highest in the EU, according to Eurostat. And what happens when you flood the economy with cash while supply is constrained? Ding, 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 inflation. But wait, there's more. The government's cozy relationship with certain industries, energy, has led to price distortions that are fueling inflation even further. For example, Hungary's state-controlled energy prices have lagged behind global market trends, creating artificial shortages and driving up costs for businesses. And who pays the price? The average Hungarian, of course, who's stuck choosing between groceries and heat. But hey, at least the government can pat itself on the back for supporting the people, right? Wrong. This is economic mismanagement 101, and it's pushing Hungary straight into a recessionary spiral. And now, dear viewers, we arrive at the heart of the matter, the Hungarian government's starring role in this economic disaster. Let's be real, central banks don't operate in a vacuum. The NBH's decision to hold rates at 6.5% isn't just about discipline or geopolitical tensions, it's about cleaning up the mess left by years of government incompetence. And oh boy, has the government been busy. For starters, let's talk about Hungary's obsession with Chinese investment. Sure, it's great to have shiny new factories and infrastructure projects, but at what cost? By tying itself so closely to China, Hungary has made itself a pawn in the global trade war, with no real plan B. And when Trump's tariffs hit, who's left holding the bag? Not the government officials cutting ribbons at grand openings, that's for sure, it's the Hungarian workers and businesses who are paying the price. But it's not just about trade. The government's fiscal irresponsibility is the real kicker here. Just look at the latest data. Hungary's public debt to GDP ratio hit 76% in 2024, up from 66% in 2020, according to the IMF. And what's driving that debt? Not productive investments in education or infrastructure, oh no, it's populist handouts, tax breaks for cronies, and a bloated public sector. Meanwhile, the government has done next to nothing to address structural issues like labor shortages, declining productivity, and an aging population. In fact, Hungary's labor force participation rate is one of the lowest in the EU, at just 64% in 2024, per Eurostat. But hey, why fix the fundamentals when you can just throw money at the problem, right? And let's not forget the government's role in undermining the central bank's independence. Governor Varga may talk a big game about orthodox policy, but let's not kid ourselves, his appointment in March 2025 was a political move, plain and simple. The Hungarian government has a long history of meddling in monetary policy, pressuring the NBH to keep rates low to juice short-term growth, only to backtrack when inflation spirals out of control. Sound familiar? It should. This is the same playbook we've seen in Turkey, Argentina, and countless other countries where governments prioritize politics over economics. And who suffers? You, me, and every hard-working Hungarian trying to make ends meet. So, where does this leave us, folks? Let's connect the dots. Hungary's economy is a house of cards, propped up by Chinese investment, government handouts, and a central bank that's too scared to act. Global trade tensions are hammering exports, inflation is eroding purchasing power, and high interest rates are choking businesses and consumers alike. And what's the government doing about it? Nothing. In fact, they're making it worse, with fiscal irresponsibility and political meddling that would make even the most reckless central planner blush. Here's the harsh truth. Hungary is on the brink of a serious economic recession, and the government's mismanagement is to blame. Just look at the latest forecasts. The IMF projects Hungary's GDP growth to slow to just 1.2% in 2025, down from 2.5% in 2024. And that's the optimistic scenario. If trade tensions escalate further, or if the forint takes another nosedive, we could be looking at negative growth by 2026. Meanwhile, unemployment is already ticking up, with the jobless rate rising to 4.8% in Q1 2025, per Hungary's Central Statistical Office. And with inflation still raging, we're talking about a textbook case of stagflation, high prices, low growth, and rising unemployment. Sound fun? Didn't think so. So, what's the moral of the story, dear viewers? Once again, we see that governments and their central bank cronies are the architects of our economic misery. Hungary's central bank may think it's being disciplined and patient, but in reality, it's just paralyzed by fear, stuck in a cycle of inaction while the economy crumbles. And the government? Don't even get me started. Years of fiscal irresponsibility, political meddling, and short-term thinking have left Hungary vulnerable to every global shock, with no real plan to dig itself out of the hole. But here's the kicker, folks, this isn't just Hungary's problem. This is a global epidemic. From the US to the EU to China, governments everywhere are prioritizing politics over economics, kicking the can down the road while ordinary people pay the price. And until we start holding these clowns accountable, we're doomed to repeat this cycle of boom, bust, and bailout. So, what can you do, dear viewer? Stay informed, stay angry, and stay tuned to Boss Economics World, where we'll keep exposing the economic insanity, one government blunder at a time. Until next time, keep fighting the good fight, and remember, the only thing more inflated than Hungary's prices is the government's ego.